All right, this is my Vloggins, and I don't know what number it is, but this is the vlog where I talk about art, illustration, cartooning, graphic design, and who am I? I'm Joshua Kemble. I'm an art director. I've been an art director for over 7 years now, going on my 8th year, and before that and currently also do a lot of graphic design, illustration for a living, and then I also do cartooning as well. So when I'm not working as an art director or being a dad and a husband, I'm working on my own graphic novels, and in general I'm going to be talking about the progress of my second graphic novel, the sequel to Two Stories Book One, which you can pick up for a discounted rate at Amazon.com. And if you don't want to pick it up there, you can also check out or ask your local comic book shop, your LCS, to order it. It's a comic about faith and mental illness, 120 hand-lettered, hand-inked pages, and it'll give you a window into like what I do as a cartoonist, and it'll give you a good entry point into like kind of my vision for art when I have full control over it. So yeah, so I am heading home. This is the vlog, by the way, where I talk about my art life, my thoughts on art, and stuff like that, on my commute to or from work, because I have a hell of a commute. And anybody who's followed my Vloggins doesn't need to hear that whole rigmarole. There you go. It took me 2 minutes. I need to get my, I need to get that time down, like, significantly. So, I am heading home. It's been an interesting, crazy, very busy day. Like a lot of the time with the creative department, a lot of the time you're just kind of barely making deadline on everything during rush seasons, and this rush season's gonna last for, you know, a little bit longer. I'd imagine like another month or two. But yeah, it's just it's intense. Like, you get to work as hard as you possibly can, and you plug out more than you ever thought you could as an artist. It's pretty fun, but I'm pretty exhausted. And my goal is to get home, and by the time I get home, what I'd like to do is I obviously need to read to my kid. That's priority number one. I always, lately, also my wife's back's been out, so I've been doing bath time as well. So got to get him bathed and then read him a book to have some hangout time with his dad. And we've been reading him books every night since he was born, pretty much. And it's helped. He's a really good reader in his classes, so I recommend it. I'm not saying it works all the time, but at least in our lives, we've noticed that it's contributed to him growing and being very literate for an 8-year-old, you know. So anyhow, I'm heading home, and I am thinking about art. I'm thinking about Dada for some reason, and so I thought I'd talk about that a little bit for this vlog, and we'll see where that goes. So, there are all these kind of pseudo movements that I've noticed in comics in general, online. And I don't know if it's so much with comics, but with comics online, where people are claiming that they're kind of like being the indie revolution or something, and but they're completely detached from the whole history, the long history of independent comics and what independent comics have done. So this doesn't apply to everyone, but it just applies to a select few, and I don't want to call them out or anything. But I will just say I'm really suspicious of movements that are unaware of the history of punk rock, unaware of the history of Dada in art, like, or the Fluxus movement, and are like purporting to be like some big revolution in comics, and then the comics they're making are like the same comics that the mainstream's making. Just kind of maybe like rehashed or like worse. And like, so, I'm gonna throw out my ideas on this, and if you're offended, let me know in the chats or in the comment section. I don't think anybody I know would be offended, because most cartoonists I know are working on some pretty cool stuff. But, yeah, there's this weird pervasive idea that I've noticed with some kind of cartoonists that are like trying to almost do like Marvel or DC style comics, and are angry at Marvel and DC comics, and are making pseudo Marvel and DC comics. Like, their comics look like rehashed versions of the big two. The plots often are exactly the same, like the same kinds of plots. And they're kind of proposing that what they're doing is a revolution. And it's so weird to me. Anyhow, it's weird to me, the idea that that would be a revolution in art. Revolutions in art look like Dadaism. And I know this is unpopular because a lot of artists I know, especially commercial artists, which I am one, very proudly, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I love commercial art. I love illustration. I love graphic design. But I also really like illustration for illustration's sake. I like seeing artistic visions come to life, and especially when those things are able to rise above and somehow get published or put out or self-published, whatever way people want to put them out. I am like 100% a fan. But like, to me, real revolutions in comics should look more like revolutions in art, and there have been a few that I'm aware of, and I'm not like the biggest comics history buff, but I'm going to go over a few things. But first I want to talk about Dada. So Dadaism, I am a big fan of, and I'll tell you why. Dadaism came out at a time where like formalistic thought was sort of dominating art. And not just formalistic, because the formalist movement ended up being kind of like Greenbergian ideas of like flatness and texture and shape, and making paintings that are only about those things. But like, this is like before that whole movement, which had a resurgence, and like postmodernism was very much a reflection and a fight against that kind of thinking of like rigid formalism, Greenbergian kind of formalist movements and stuff. Prior to that though, like, you have Dada, and Dadaists were kind of reacting to like naturalism. Like, people were being very realistic and very intentional in their paintings, and representational in their paintings. And Dadaism was like a response to an art world that had gotten really snobby, and had gotten a little closed-minded and gotten thoughtless. Like, they were sort of making objects of art without thinking about what those objects were. And so you have somebody like Marcel Duchamp, who kind of came along and like challenged what those things were. Like, and you had artists like sort of doing things like, this is not a pipe, and then painting a pipe. Making you question like whether contextual definitions define something, whether text defines something, or whether image defines something. It was really challenging the status quo. But the thing I love about Dada and Duchamp in general, Marcel Duchamp, is when he got to the point of making a toilet, a urinal, I think he called it the fountain. He had it installed. He signed and dated it. I think it was made based on a bet that he had made with a friend about like the idea that museums had gotten so deific in what they were putting in museums. Like, they were kind of deifying anything that was within a museum was suddenly holy and sacred and insanely valuable, that he was saying like, you could probably put like a urinal, recontextualize it by putting it in a museum, And just by signing and dating it, you wouldn't even have to sign the artist's name. The date wouldn't even have to be accurate. But just with a signature and a date, the thing would become priceless. And it worked, because the art world had gotten to the point where you could actually do that. So it was kind of like, I love it. It was a big middle finger to the art world, and the art world kind of ate it up. And I feel like that's a real good challenge to the system. I feel like the Fluxus movement, you know, pop art was like a real challenge to the system. It was creating artwork that was sort of like making fun of commercial art, recontextualizing it in a museum, and kind of making fun of museums as well, by highlighting commercial art. So sort of like a double shot, a double hit against both things, like kind of making fun of how popular culture sort of glorifies violence, and at the same time how museums somehow have this divide between commercial art and what is real art. Anyhow, I'm no art history major. I did get an MFA, so I had to take a lot of art history classes, but I'm sure I'm getting some of these details wrong. But my point being, like, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to see what these people were doing, whether you like it or not, was a challenge to the art world at the time. I'd even go as far as to say, like, you know, Pollock and his splatter form painting was a really clear, obvious challenge to the art world at the time. If you know, the fact that to this day, there are people who just like get bitter and furious about this splattered ink that Pollock was doing in museums, or Rothko, like these blank canvases. The fact that people get so irate and worked up, and it generates so much emotion and controversy, I think, you know, and given that some of that artwork's, we're getting to the point where some of that stuff's like almost 100 years old, and it still has this like infuriating impact. I have not really met a lot of art students that don't have a moment when they see Duchamp's urinal, the fountain, who don't get pissed, because they're just like, it's just a toilet. It's a public urinal in an art museum. How come, like, why even learn craft? Why even study? It makes people have this visceral, angry response, like, that's kind of punk rock, is all I'm saying. And it's kind of awesome, and that's kind of what art revolutions look like. They can also look like the Impressionists, you know, who like came out and kind of started painting color as color actually looked, rather than using these sort of sanguine color palettes that are like sepia tones with like a warm and cool subtly mixed in, but it's very much like value-based painting. And then you have these Impressionists come and be like, no, we're gonna use impasto techniques, and we're gonna like use wet on wet, and we're gonna do visceral, like feeling-based paintings in order to explore and represent truth. And we're really gonna study color, like, but not color in like the sense of like just rendering a form, color as we actually see it. So we're gonna look at using color comparison, like the purple in that shadow, and how that purple is kind of being created by the complementary lighting, and we're gonna kind of play with that and explore the form and push the form further and do a thing that no one's done before. That's what revolutions look like in art. What I don't think revolutions look like in art is like people who are mad about like, oh man, we got to move past the Sistine Chapel. We got to advance. We gotta come up with a new revolutionary movement, and then make a Sistine Chapel that's an exact copy, an exact replica of the previous master. Meanwhile, crap on the guy who made the Sistine Chapel. Like, that to me is not a revolution. What that is like crappy mimicry with the assumption that you're doing something revolutionary or something to further a medium, but really you're just kind of participating in the same exact tradition that you're critiquing. And you know, like at that point, is that revolutionary? I don't know. I think revolutions in art are things like the guys in the salon who were doing impressionism and getting kicked out because they were challenging, like, you know, the gaze that women gave people, like the female gaze, like in art traditionally up until you know, like the romantic movement, like you didn't really have anyone challenging like the fact that, like, you couldn't have, if you had a nude and they were making eye contact, it was considered perverse. And then you had artists that kind of challenged that by painting nudes that were looking directly at you, which was shocking at the time. So shocking that the paintings got like an uproar and censorship, like mass censorship. Anyhow, so that's what a revolution looks like in art. But I feel like there's a bunch of hucksters, personally. Like, I feel like there's some hucksters online who are kind of walking around pretending that they're making revolutions by doing independent comics. And everybody should be doing independent comics. Independent comics are awesome. But don't pretend it's a revolution if you're just kind of making the same superhero story, or you're retreating back to the past to kind of participate in a tradition. It's okay to just say, hey, we're furthering tradition, or hey, we just want comics that are exactly recycled from the ones that we dislike or we're challenging, but they're just going to express a different viewpoint or something like that. But to, you know, I don't know. I feel like the idea of claiming these things are a revolution is a weird thing. Do you guys know what I'm talking about, or does this sound too vague? I hope it doesn't sound too vague. So to me, like, Terry and the Pirate, I think it was called, sorry, not Terry and the Pirates, it's Mickey Mouse and the, oh my gosh, I'm blanking out on what it was called. So we'll just, I think it's Mickey Mouse and the Pirates, or the Sea Pirates. It, you know, this is the era of like Zap Comics, when indie cartoonists were at their height. And they decided to, a group of cartoonists actually decided to do these really lewd, pornographic Mickey Mouse comics. But they were done so traditionally, like so beautifully, that they looked like legit Mickey Mouse cartoons from like 20 years prior. But they were just completely perverse. And they were doing it to challenge copyright law and also get laughs. And they ended up getting sued by Disney all the way through the courts until I think it went to like the highest court. And the suit was, I believe, dismissed, although they did have to pay damages for infringing on copyright. Some of the claims of Disney, I think, were sort of disregarded, and they were just sort of forced to cease and desist. But they actually kind of won the case as best they could against a big behemoth like Disney. That's revolutionary. Like, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it, like, personally, you know, it's not something I'd want to make, but at the same time, like, I get it. That's revolutionary. That's revolution in comics. Now, you know, part of punk rock, part of the idea of like a sort of thing that goes against the system that uses raw DIY ethics is having a unique vision, and also I think there needs to be truth and expression. There is a movement that's been going on in indie comics for years that's making headway, and it's taken a lot of cartoonists a very long time to start getting respected and shown in a literary framework, because comics have always for years been viewed as something that are for kids, even for me, I'm not that old, but I'm older than I think a lot of the younger generations getting into comics. And even my generation, we had to face a lot of, if I said I wanted to do comics, people would assume I meant like Spider-Man or Superman, or they might even just think I meant that I wanted to do comic strips in a newspaper. They, you know, like most people when I was younger hadn't really heard of Mouse, and they should have, but they hadn't. And then if you told them about Mouse after reading it by Art Spiegelman, they would just think it was like, just wasn't worthwhile or good or anything like that. And here's a book that was taking on a really heavy historical conversation and doing it in the comic medium, and doing it so well that I don't know if it could ever be adapted into a film. It's just a perfect comic. It's a comic that's self-contained and would be very hard to adapt into any other medium because it was intentionally made as a comic. That's revolutionary. And it opened the doors to book publishing routes and libraries. And we've been in this fight in cartooning and in comics for a long time to kind of get representation and get real consideration of comics as a real, physically valid art form. Even when I was going to art school, you know, like I had to fight to do comics. There was like a bias against comics with my teachers and stuff like that. Because when you said comics, they assume that you're going there as somebody who wants to do like Marvel-style superhero comics. Again, nothing against that sort of comic. I grew up with that kind of comic. That's one of the styles of comic books that got me into comics. I think there is a great realm of art and fun things going on in comics that are in that genre. But I would say, like, you know, Watchmen was revolutionary because of how it treated superheroes. And I feel like there's a lot of like recycled Watchmen comics. There's a lot of recycled mainstream superhero comics. There's a lot of mainstream superhero comics that are kind of recycling old, like maybe they're trying to go back to Golden Age or Silver Age. So I'd almost say like it's like a traditional approach to comics. And then there's like this whole movement of indie comics that have been fighting for years to get into libraries and make literature and make books for kids that aren't just like Scrooge McDuck, which by the way, Scrooge McDuck is excellent, but you know what I mean? Like they were kind of picking up Walt Kelly, what the path that people like that made with things like Scrooge McDuck, in order to kick open the door to make things like American-Born Chinese, you know, a more serious literary work for kids. And I'm not saying we all need to be pursuing that or whatever, but my point is, like, I guess I've been thinking about how weird it is that for some reason I think revolution's been hijacked by people who aren't being revolutionary. And I kind of get it. I get that it's like a good marketing route and stuff. But I feel like the real revolutionary cartoonists in comics right now are the ones paving the way to have comics in bookstores, to have comics treated as serious literature and art, and are telling a variety of stories that go beyond just superhero stories. I think that's the pathway, that's the people who are making headway. And that does not mean anything to belittle people like kind of doing superhero comics or comics with like cute animal stories. There's just, I guess my point is, if you're saying you're being revolutionary, then how are you being revolutionary? And if you find that your revolution is actually not all that, like, much of a game changer in art, then maybe it's not that revolutionary. That's my only point. Anyhow, just something I'm thinking off the cuff. Like, the nice thing about these vlogs is I think about them very quickly. I guess my point is, like, what is so revolutionary about, like, a superhero comic that is recycling an old storyline from years past of previous superhero comics? There are a lot of guys doing superhero comics that can outdraw me any day of the week. But you know, I feel like the word revolutionary is misused quite a lot in comics, in the online sphere. I don't know if it is so much in the real world outside of the interwebs. But yeah, so that's something I've been thinking about. Let me know your thoughts on the matter. Do you think there are, like, serious revolutions occurring in comics that have to do with superheroes? Or do you feel like that's more of like a traditionalist approach, trying to kind of carry on like the old flame? Which again, you know, is a great thing. Like in painting, for instance, there are people who practice like real formalistic quality painting. There's people who study, you know, spend lifetime studying Rembrandt and his later portraits, and like trying to figure out the somewhat impasto technique he was using. And they make great paintings. There's very formalistic forms of art that are excellent. The question is, are they revolutionary? And to me, revolutionary should be game-changing stuff, like stuff that is trying to change the genre, push the genre into new directions, and at the end of the day, like, hopefully challenge people's perceptions of what comics can do, and also depict everything that comics can do well, not just make like a movie pitch. I don't know. Anyhow, those are my thoughts. I will say I put those thoughts into practice, and I'm curious what you guys think. Check out Two Stories, my book, Two Stories by Joshua Kemble. It's hand-lettered, hand-inked, and handed to you for a reasonably low price at Amazon.com, so you can just look for Two Stories, Joshua Kemble. And if you don't find, you know, like, shopping on Amazon to be a preference, because a lot of people hate Amazon, support your local comic book shop or your local indie bookstore by asking them to order Two Stories by Joshua Kemble from Ingram. So yeah, that'll do it for my vlog. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are. I don't know. I was randomly thinking about like different kind of things that I would consider like revolutions in art. I can do the same thing with music, you know, where it's like when you had Bob Dylan coming out and doing things with folk that hadn't been done before, and kind of reframing that whole genre of music, and then going to electric and doing things that hadn't been done before. You have, you know, you have bands like the Dead Kennedys coming out and doing stuff nobody had done before. You have bands like Fugazi coming out there and like taking punk rock that was known as like this hardcore thing and taking it to a level that nobody had gone before. Again, like, I feel like there are these revolutions in music. Maybe those aren't the ones you would think of, but would you think like a cover band is a revolutionary band? Because I feel like, to me, and this isn't in our direct community, but I've just seen this in the comics community online, where there's a lot of talk of revolution in comics, and it's people literally just in cover bands. They're like, we're a revolutionary band, that's why we're gonna do a cover of Freebird. It's like, dude, you can't cover Freebird and pretend you're a revolutionary band. Maybe a revolutionary band could do a cover of Freebird, but the stuff they're gonna do that's revolutionary probably isn't that. So if you're out there doing cover songs, don't call yourself revolutionary. I mean, come on. You know, I don't know if that makes sense. All right, that's my thoughts on stuff. I want to know your thoughts in the comments, and again, hit subscribe, hit the bell, hit the like button, hit the dislike button. Tell me how much my comics aren't revolutionary, actually, after you've checked out 2 stories, let me know if you can kind of see where I'm getting at. Thinking out loud, I'm trying to kind of form my own thoughts on this to have a more boiled down viewpoint later on, but right now it's just like free throwing thought of like, don't call yourself a revolutionary unless you actually are interested in pushing things further or into territories they haven't been before. But don't go on the old trodden ground and call yourself a revolutionary. All right, guys, that'll do it, and I will see you on the next Vloggins. Or if, like, tonight, I'm hoping I can take, like, a very brief power nap and then hopefully do another live stream. I was so pleased last night. I did just an off-the-cuff live stream, and it was just so comforting and cool to have, like, quite a few people show up in the chats and kind of hang out. And I love that because it makes the art-making process so much more fun. I think you guys will find that it makes the art-making process a lot of fun too, just to have that dialogue, like almost like being in a studio, or like, you know, late night on a campus, like working on art projects, or in the bullpen at Marvel. Anyhow, whatever. That's my thoughts, and I will talk to you guys later. And yeah, have a good productive work week. And again, these are just my opinions. These aren't prescriptions. These are just my opinions and my thoughts. And if your thoughts are different, I want to hear them. All right, bye.